Hello. In this session, we are going to look at the role and responsibilities of laborers or helpers at site. When we talk about a construction labor, they are basically workers employed in the physical construction of the built environment and infrastructure as well. So when we talk about laborers, what exactly do laborers do? Now that is something that every site engineer needs to know before entering the site as well. As a student, we think that the engineers give the order, the laborers do the work. Yes, that is right. But is it exactly everything that laborers do? Not really. Now, that is something that we need to understand way before we become a site engineer. So, laborers are not just about executing work, and not all laborers are for executing work. So, we need to understand first in terms of their expertise, their skills, their experience, their attitude, and most importantly, the productivity of each labor. And what is productivity of a labor? How much work they can do per the man hours. When we say man hours, is one working day. And as a thumb rule, we assume that one working day is 8 hours of working. So in the 8 hours of working, what is the productivity of each labor? But how can we compare all the labors together? That is where we need to understand that labors come under many divisions. Three major kinds of labors is something that we'll be discussing now. First one is loading and unloading labors. These are called housekeeping labors. So housekeeping labors means they load, they unload the materials, they move the materials from one place to another place, they choose the work areas, they store the materials at the right place, and they clean the whole thing after the loading or unloading has been done. So this is what the housekeeping labor does. And these are the lowest paid labors in the construction site. Here, we do not differentiate much between a skilled labor and an unskilled labor because the most of the time, this will be a transporting job rather than an execution based job. So, this is where you have the housekeeping labor. And housekeeping labor is very important to make sure that the exact works are happening on time. Not all labors are directly related to each work that is happening. The housekeeping labor is not involved in the execution. Housekeeping laborers are not the ones who will build the structure, but they are the ones who make sure that the construction of the structure is happening on time. The second one is your executional labor, where they are involved in mixing, pouring of concrete, spreading materials, use help for asphalt, slab concreting, column concreting, block works, paint, plaster, all those things. So anyone who is involved in the direct execution of the work comes under the execution labors. Now here, the difference between skilled labor and non-skilled or unskilled labor is huge. The pay scale is different, the expertise is different, the potential to grow is also higher. One can become an expert by getting into the skilled labor. Now this is where we look at in terms of stages of labors as well. Initially, when someone new comes to the site, they're never given the execution labor job. They're always given the housekeeping jobs. So, housekeeping labor is the first job or the entry level for every labor. And once that entry level is passed, they come into the unskilled labors under execution works. So, once they get skilled, once they understand what happens in the site, once they start to gain experience and knowledge, then they are able to implement that knowledge in the next projects. And that is when the laborers make the leap from unskilled labor to the skilled labor. The third part will be the equipment labors. So when I talk about equipment labors, these are very high skilled labors, and of course, the potential for them is to become an operator. First kind of labors is assisting the operators about what to do and what not to do, making sure the attachments are fixed, making sure the bolt nuts are on point, making sure that everyone else is guided towards the rescue point as well. So if there is a moving equipment, they have to make sure that the engineers and the other laborers are informed that the equipment is coming through in this area. Without that information, a huge risk, or in terms of safety, there is going to be a huge risk or a potential issue that might happen in a project site. So it is very important for laborers to get into those stages as well, where they can assist the operators of machineries like crane or earth mover or tractor or a truck or any other kind of machineries. So this is where the labors can be divided as. Now, does each project have all three types of labors? Not really. Sometimes the housekeeping labor can handle the basic machineries by themselves. So if it is a small house construction where you are only using the concrete mixer, then housekeeping labor itself will be transferred to equipment labor also, because it is only about assistance. They are not the ones who are exactly mixing. The mixing and pouring will be done by the execution labors. So only for two kinds of labors you can go ahead with the project. However, if you are talking about a big project, then you will have multiple kinds of labors. And the job of laborers, like I told, is to make sure they hit the productivity. Now, can I compare the productivity of a housekeeping labor to the productivity of an execution labor? No. That is why it is important for site engineer to understand the metrics to judge how a housekeeping labor is performing to the standards of housekeeping labors, keep it aside, then come to execution labors, look at the productivity that they are following, compare it with their own standards, and make sure you judge them in the right way. So, as site engineers, we need to handle labors in multiple ways. And because there are skilled labors and unskilled labors, you need to handle them in two different ways altogether. All right, so this is how we can look at the duties handled by laborers or helpers and look at how site engineers can take this and make sure you learn this before you get into site management, because you need to know what kind of labor you have at site at any point of time. So this is how you look at the responsibilities and roles handled by the laborers. In the next video, we'll be looking at multiple other things like site layout and other things about the projects. So in the next video, we'll be talking about site layout. I hope you learned something about the roles and responsibilities of 3-4 selected profiles in the construction site. So see you in the next video.